I am Tracey Quillen Carney. I have the privilege of serving as the First Lady of Delaware, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Alonna Berry.
Hi, I'm Alonna Berry. I'm the statewide trauma-informed care coordinator. What motivated you to try and make this an issue in our state, in our community, and a policy priority?
You know, one of the great things about this role is you do get to be an advocate and a convener. Really, those are the two powers that come with being a first spouse. And I knew right away that I wanted to use those two, those two powers of this position to try to build a culture of commitment to children in different ways, and specifically recognition and response to childhood trauma, in part because of personal experience, because I had a significant traumatic experience when I was about 10 years old that, because it was left unaddressed, sort of derailed my life. And it's not that that personal experience is so important, but if that happened to me in an incredible position of privilege, imagine what it does in the life of a child who doesn't have all the advantages that I had, like married, economically secure parents who were not violent, who wanted me to succeed, who had good health insurance, good job. I'm conscious that the people who are in a position to help were more inclined to give me a chance than to judge me. And that's bias being in my favor. So I talk about my own experience, which did motivate the work, just knowing how bad unaddressed trauma can be. But I talk about it not to bring attention to that, but with empathy for what it must be like for families who are struggling more than mine at that time, and how hard it must be to bounce back from trauma, to grow beyond trauma, as we say at TMD, without the resources that were available to me and my family. So that's why I talk about my experience, which was motivating, but it's mostly as a motivator of empathy.
It's really nice to hear you talk about your own kind of experiences. How would you say that's really impacted your life into adulthood, and how do you see those connections even more broadly to the work that we're doing here in Delaware?
We know that we can do something. It's the long-lasting effects of trauma that are preventable. And it's those long-lasting effects that lead to things like lower test scores, lower grades, more retentions, more suspensions and expulsions, and throughout life, more high-risk behaviors and bad health conditions, including the health conditions associated with, by far, the majority of premature deaths in this country.
So to that point, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about some of the things that we have done, particularly in Delaware. Could you speak a little bit about the First Chance initiative and that work that you've done?
First Chance Delaware is our first spouse initiative. So First Chance doesn't have one focus. It has three, and it's kind of a mind, body, spirit idea. If you think in those terms, ending childhood hunger in our state, promoting early language experience toward healthy brain development and school readiness, and the effective recognition and response to childhood trauma. I just think you have to get out of silos in order to address any of those successfully. That you need a diversity of experience represented, including the expertise of lived experience, of direct experience. We need to elevate those voices and listen to our neighbors who know their lives and their communities.
So a lot of that piece about understanding community and culture and that kind of cultural responsiveness lives in trauma-informed approaches and practices. And we also know that trauma-informed approaches and practices have the ability to shift the impact of trauma on a person's life long term, and the impact of trauma on a young person, right? And so can you talk a little bit about some of those approaches in prevention and treating adversity and how that can positively impact kids' lives?
I think, so many people, you talk about the things we've done in Delaware, the formal act of the executive order, I think, was crucial. I think that jump-started a lot of things that had been going on at a behind-the-scenes or modest level for a long time. There were a lot of people involved in this work before John and I showed up. But the executive order jump-started some things, and so many people through training in trauma awareness have had these aha moments. The standard line used to be, instead of asking people what's wrong with you, we ask what happened to you. And now we're sort of moving on to asking what's right with you, what are your strengths. And I think part of that orientation is switching from judgment to curiosity and interest, making a connection instead of making a judgment.
So can you talk a little bit about kind of how you're thinking about your role on the national scale in relationship to trauma and trauma-informed care, and the work around pathways to resilience?
I'm excited about Pathways to Resilience because, again, there's no such thing as the smartest person in the room, and Pathways to Resilience is going to give us a forum to collaborate and share best practices from all over the country in all different kinds of contexts, and create practical resources for people to use in their industries, in their state, whether it's state government, schools, for employers, which I think is very important. So I'm excited about that. I claim no greater expertise than anybody else involved as an advocate and head cheerleader in this work. It's not because I'm an expert. I was privileged to be asked by Casey Family Programs to introduce some of these ideas to a group of first spouses, and then met the folks from Pathways to Resilience who have set up a First Spouse Steering Committee so that we can bring our voices as advocates and the experts in each of our states together toward raising everybody's level of understanding of trauma-informed approaches and the urgency of it, the promise of it, and again, sometimes the very low-cost steps that people can take, because it's what young people can do, what parents and caregivers can do, what people in the tech companies can do, what employers can do, what schools can do. There's a role for all of us.
So what are you hopeful for in this initiative and kind of the future?
My hope springs from hearing people like the Surgeon General and Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris describe this issue as treatable, preventable, beatable, a public health crisis we really have some control over. I think that's really a hopeful thing. I also think when you're talking about hope with regard to kids, I mean, they are our hope, aren't they? There's nothing more hopeful than looking at a happy child's face. That has to be the epitome of hope. I do think hope is a basic need. I don't think change happens without hope. I remember my high school U.S. history class learning about revolutions and how revolutions never happen when the people are hopeless. And I think you can generalize that to real change doesn't happen without hope. And I think the research and our experience in this work has given us evidence to show people that there is hope. There is stuff we can do.